I think in Hollywood there should be a rule, especially with comedies, that after a certain amount of time, if you haven't made a sequel by then, you need to just go ahead and leave it alone. What's up everybody, Johnnie Omega here, back with a new review, this time talking about the new movie Coming to America 2. So let's get to it. Prince Akeem is set to become king of Zamunda, but he must fulfill his father's dying wish of bringing home a male heir when it's discovered that Akeem has a son who lives in Queens. Now, if you're new to this channel, thanks for stopping by, and if you've been here before, thanks for coming back. In my reviews, I discuss what I liked, what I didn't like, and then my overall thoughts. So starting with what I liked about the movie, we gotta start with the two returning characters of Akeem and Semi, played by Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall. Their chemistry together was pretty much the backbone of the original movie, and it's safe to say that them two together still work. Unfortunately, them two together don't happen much in this movie. But with what you did get with those two characters, you could still tell that those two actors still had it. Another thing I liked about this movie was the costume designs. No matter what you may have thought about a particular character or the way they were used or how big or small their role was, the costumes in this movie worked on every level. I also really like the barbershop scenes. After watching the trailers, I kind of got the impression that some of the funniest parts of the movie, at least to me, were going to be in the barbershop, and that's pretty much what happened. Now, there were other funny parts in this movie, but they were few and far between, and that's pretty much what leads me to what I didn't like about this movie. Now, we all know that the point of a comedy is to make you laugh, and how much you laugh in a movie is usually in direct correlation with how good that movie is overall. And with that being said, this movie missed way more than it hit with the comedy. It's like this movie tried to be funny instead of just being funny. And we all pretty much knew that this movie wasn't going to be as funny as the original, so I'm not comparing it to that. I'm looking at this movie on its own, and on its own, it just wasn't that funny. Somewhere around the late 90s, Eddie Murphy comedies changed. Most of the movies before that pretty much seemed like it was Eddie Murphy just naturally being funny, and even though his comedy isn't for everybody, if you liked it, you pretty much thought it was hilarious. But everything after that kind of seemed like his comedy was more on a broad scale, and it kind of diluted how funny he actually was. And now, generally speaking, he's funnier to more people, but he's not as funny to any particular person. And this particular movie definitely fell more into that category than I wanted it to. But I did think Wesley Snipes was pretty funny though. I like how there was always this grand spectacle every time he walked in a room. And just to quickly go over some other things I didn't like, I really didn't like all the celebrity cameos, especially the musical performances. They really felt out of place for me, and they had no bearing on the story. The funeral scene and the scene where Akeem's son meets his arranged bride for the first time pretty much felt like a Disney movie with the way musical numbers just kept popping up. And I also didn't like the obvious green screening in so many scenes. And I know that that might be a nitpick for some, but it was distracting for me. But one of the biggest things I didn't like was just the overuse of lines and themes from the first movie that were just directly taken and applied to this movie. What it felt like is like the writers had a list of just the most memorable lines and scenes from the first movie and just built this particular movie around that. And that's a big reason why some of the jokes and the humor in this movie didn't work for me, because they seemed like they were recycled and put in this movie for nostalgia purposes more so than to actually be funny. And all of these things probably could have been addressed if it wasn't for the biggest thing that was the problem with this movie, and that was the writing. Overall, the story was interesting, but it wasn't well put together. You have all these characters that you're supposed to be invested in some way, shape, form, or fashion, but you only really focus on about a handful of them for any meaningful amount of time. In the first movie, it was about Akeem trying to find love. In this movie, you have Akeem taking over as king and dealing with all the conflicts that come with that. You have Akeem's son Lavelle, who has to deal with being a prince while also going through his journey to find love, which is basically a mini version of Akeem's story 30 years ago. You have Akeem's oldest daughter and her bitterness to this entire situation because she's not able to rule Zamunda due to the fact that she's a female. You have Wesley Snipes' character, who's a general in another country who's threatening to assassinate Akeem. Then you have Lavelle's mom and uncle, played by Leslie Jones and Tracy Morgan, who are side characters, but you still do have to deal with their adjustments to life in Zamunda. There are just so many moving parts to this movie, and it's not hard to follow, but I do think this movie would have been better off having a more centralized focus. So in conclusion, I think this movie was poorly written, poorly executed. It spent more time trying to be nostalgic than to be its own story. The acting overall wasn't bad, but I don't think these actors were given much to work with. There were some funny moments in the movie, but nothing that was really outright hilarious. I like the chemistry that Eddie and Arsenio still had, I just wished there was more of that. And whoever the costume designer is needs to get a raise on her next gig. I do also think that the toned down rating hindered this movie too. Going from an 80s R rating to a PG-13 rating in today's society is definitely going to limit the things that you can say and do. And just to be clear, when it comes to my final rating of this movie, I'm not directly comparing this to the original, I'm judging it on its own merit. But with all that being said, I'd say this movie is cool to watch if there's nothing else on TV. So comment below and let me know what you guys thought of the movie. Did you like it? Did you not? Did you think it was better than the first one? Either way, I'd love to see your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for watching. If you like what you're seeing, hit that thumbs up and click that subscribe button to see what's coming next.